Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here today. Um, I'm Kristen Lampert, and I'm here to present on talent optimization, and particularly how we use the concept of talent optimization to improve talent strategies and overall business performance. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm Kristen, and my role really has been over the last 4 or 5 years in the consulting space with other HR leaders, helping them identify and improve their performance through talent optimization. But before that, I've spent the majority of my career really in the HR seat, leading either talent management or the head of HR for several organizations across the US. I'm here as a representative of Broadleaf, who is one of the members of HRO, but we are the consulting arm of the broader Aleron family of businesses. So Broadleaf is one of our sister companies, and I lead a lot of the talent consulting and coaching here at TalentRise. And our mission's really around elevating performance through talent optimization. And the way we think about that really is through the context of executive search and integrating some talent optimized tools and resources into how we search for great talent. But then we also have a really robust talent and organizational effectiveness practice. So this is a little bit about us, but that's not why we're here today. We're here really to learn and understand a little bit more around talent optimization. So the way I want to frame today's conversation is really around the concepts of what are the key leader responsibilities in any business, right? Every leader, whether or not you're in the C-suite or across the organization, are always managing the difference between business strategy, executing what needs to happen in the business to drive results, and then helping their people execute on their mission. And so that people component in the middle is really where we look at talent optimization. And what we know is that right now, it's a difficult time to manage people. One is people are complex. Two, leaders are oftentimes relying on their gut to get things done or to make shift or difference in the organization. And if the leader isn't necessarily taking that leadership role, sometimes HR is the one who's kind of playing triage and leading those efforts on the organization's behalf. I think everyone probably can relate to that today. So what we think about when we talk about all that guesswork in that middle circle, when it comes to people, when you're trying to drive both business strategy and business results, is what we call a people tax. When you think about it, these are all the people related things that end up driving tension in the organization. It can be the turnover that we're experiencing at record numbers. It could be low productivity. It could be around engagement, right? Or lack thereof. And that people tax has real execution risk when you think about how we show up in our ability to drive strategy, and fundamentally puts us in a position of missing our targets. So what I tend to do as a consultant is help organizations address those people areas so that way we can actually keep the business on task and execute on their goals. And the way we think about doing that is through a concept of talent optimization. So talent optimization is the process of allowing yourself or your organization to better align your people with your business goals. And we think about it with four major questions. One is, are you designed in a way to deliver on your goals? I.e., do you have the players on the field in the right position to score? I love the Ted Lasso analogy. I'm sure you guys are all watching it. And if you think about it, it's all about the players on the team to get you to that goal line. You have to be asking yourselves those questions. The second question we ask is around, are you hiring intentionally to support and drive the needs of your business? And then are you motivating your people in a way that actually boosts engagement? We all know that feeling right now where people are reassessing across the world right now what engagement can look like for their organization. And finally, we ask the question around, where are the trouble spots under the surface that could actually create specific risk within the organization. And when you start to unpack these whys, you start to uncover what we see are those people risks, or the people task, and the execution risk and missed targets that we talked about earlier. So I have a question, and I don't know if others want to weigh in. You're welcome to do it through chat, but does this resonate? Like, are you hearing this in the marketplace? Do you kind of get those key questions and challenges in your life every day? And so you're welcome to chat that in. The purpose of our session today is really going to be around, one, understanding particularly the hiring. So how do we deep dive particularly on how to use people data to drive better hiring decisions? Thank you, Craig. I'm glad there's a unanimous yes here, because I think we all feel it. And the second is around design. So we're going to be zeroing in on the design part. How do we actually structure a team in a way that is optimized for performance versus just kind of reacting or trusting our gut on how we think we need to build teams? The headline here is that the way we approach it, we really think about it as Moneyball for business. And if anyone's seen that really famous movie, you're bringing analytics into a space that typically didn't have data and analysis, and you're using it to inform how you can actually drive performance. And we believe that there are certain tools out there in the marketplace that actually can act much like Moneyball did in the baseball space for HR leaders across the globe. So what we're going to dive into here is specifically this first part around hire. How do we use people data to inform hiring decisions? And I welcome those who want to chime in. You can go off mute, or you're welcome to type into the group chat. The question is, what are you doing today when it comes to using assessments or any kind of data to inform your hiring process? Anyone have comments or thoughts? Virtual interviewing, yep, absolutely. So there's a lot of really great tools, right, when it comes to being able to capture those first initial impressions of folks, and then being able to gather data on the back end to understand how it works. Great. Thank you, Craig. Any others? All right. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a tool that we love, and it's, if anyone's heard of it, you're going to learn a little bit more about it today. It's Predictive Index. And we love PI because we believe that the best solution out in the marketplace isn't one that is episodic or transactional. You can do a lot of surveys online. You can do a lot with DISC or other tools to kind of gather a point in time reference or build self-awareness. But what we're really interested in, most curious about, is how do you actually build self-awareness and awareness of others throughout the entire life cycle of your employee experience. And there's really cool ways, and we believe PI does a really great job at bringing it through the entire life cycle of from the point of hire to the point of promotion, all the way through to the point of leadership or learning and development. There's a lot of great ways to leverage a tool like this and to really reinforce a more self-aware organization. But the first step to know when we think about how we use it in interviewing is to really take a pause and understand that at the end of the day, we're always evaluating a whole person, right? So we, just like, any of the AI data that we leverage or the science behind Moneyball, there are a lot of factors that go into understanding somebody's ability to be good at a job. And what we want to do is make sure that we're obviously valuing the knowledge, skills, and experience, and still make sure that that briefcase in every person or every candidate gets properly addressed and reviewed. We know that these factors change over time. The other thing we do know as well is that there's a stable or stability part of how people show up. And that stability can come through understanding their cognitive abilities as well as their behavioral assessments. And those tools tend to be more stable over time. So they're not environmentally driven, but they're really helpful to understand both the cognitive and the drives that people show up with every day. And then that whole heart part of somebody in the job process, that part of evaluating their values, evaluating their culture, are they really truly a fit? That part really is just as important as it ever was. What we're inviting in this conversation is more information and data so that you're looking at the full person, but you're looking at them in a much more holistic way. The other thing that I think is important for us to know when we think about introducing assessments into an environment is that at the end of the day, you can't overweight them. And you also have to take them into account from a strength-based perspective, which means that we have to celebrate that we're all awesome. We add incredible value to our environments. And we want to make sure that even though we may, for one job, prefer a profile where someone, let's say, is more serious, data-driven, or cautious, for another job, somebody who is a bit more empathetic, fast-paced, and driven, or direct could be really great. It all depends on the job, and it depends on the function that you're asking them to do. So what I want to highlight are two things. One is talking about cognitive assessments. So does anyone do cognitive assessments now? If you do, you're welcome to type into the chat yes or no. But when we unpack this, what we're really talking about is understanding general cognitive ability. It's an individual's verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning, and we're trying to understand how they process complex ideas. So cognitive is really based on hundreds of years, 100 years of research that shows us that cognitive ability is a strong predictor of job performance. And throughout the last century, there has been hundreds of studies that have measured the connection between cognitive ability and job performance. In fact, there's a whole kind of statistical method called meta-analysis that has pulled in hundreds of thousands of data to be able to inform kind of the correlation between these two factors. And in fact, it explains that 42% of job performance can be predicted based on somebody's cognitive ability and their job performance. And if you want to just unpack that a second, what that actually means is that there's a higher correlation between these two factors when it comes to a person's ability to do a job effectively than there is between ibuprofen and pain relief. So there is really strong data that says, hey, if we understand how you're able to wrap your head around complex ideas, we're going to be able to predict your overall performance and role. But that comes with a big headline, and that is around understanding the complexity and change in a particular environment. So I give there, knowing that there's a strong correlation, it's also important that we look at it with a sobering lens so that we're not in a position where we are overweighting our belief that our environment is too complex. So every organization kind of may have a like me bias or a bias that they think that their work is really complex. But the truth is that the job itself may not be. It is important to know how the job correlates to the overall environment, what the demands of that job is, and then making sure that the candidate tracks accordingly. So you can use you can use cognitive assessments to understand, for example, in this case, where you have one candidate that is learning quickly and can kind of trail alongside the environmental complexity of your environment versus somebody who takes time. And it doesn't mean that that person who takes time is necessarily a bad hire, but what you do want is to see somebody kind of clean, like driving that curve. So if your environmental complexity kind of trails here, you're going to see that this person might be the right fit. It's all about how you assess your overall complexity in an organization. The Second thing I want to touch base on is behavioral assessments. So we just talked about cognitive, and that is typically a 12 to 20-minute questionnaire that really is managing reasoning. And now we're going to dive in a little bit more about behavioral assessments. So does anyone use behavioral assessments right now in their environment? You're welcome to chime in if you'd like. So the key around behavioral assessments is that it's really a simple framework to understand people's workplace behaviors. So what we're trying to understand and what we really dive in with predictive index is understanding 4 primary drives. We're going to talk a little bit about what those are. And the bottom line here is that we're looking for misalignment between somebody's natural tendencies and the key responsibilities of the job. So if somebody, for example, sales is a great example. If someone is highly social and gets a lot of energy from being around others and communicating with others, that is nicely aligned with someone who perhaps has to do a lot of cold calling versus somebody who, let's say, feels very drained in those individual interactions, maybe more introverted or analytical in nature, and in that space may not be as suited for that job. So the way we think about it are really 4 key areas. And when we think about those 4 drivers, we're talking about 1, the drive for dominance. And dominance is your desire to exert your influence on people or events. In this case, we've got someone plotted right here, about 2 sigmas over and understanding where they sit. That means that they have a somewhat moderate level of dominance in their natural state. In this chart, we see that B is around extroversion. It's that drive for social interaction with other people. And this person has in charts right here on, a high B, which would tell us that they really get a lot of energy from being around others. For C, we're talking about patience, and that isn't necessarily, are you an impatient person, but it's about how you are driven for consistency and stability in your job. So in your general life, are you looking for more serenity and stability if you're a high C, or do you really, thrive off of, a varied work environment, no day's the same, and you just love that type of energy? And finally, we're looking at formality. It's the drive to conform to rules and structure. And you can have folks who are high Ds, those who perhaps are the ones who are oftentimes writing the rules and asking for permission. And you can have those low Ds who are the folks who are willing to kind of ask more for forgiveness when it comes to how they think about the rules and regulations or structure. It doesn't mean that you're non-conformist, but that you are willing to kind of play along those boundaries versus automatically aligning to them. And what we know with PI is that there's 17 reference profiles, and each of them kind of sit in their own space of persistent, stabilizing, analytical, and social. And we like to think of those kind of as geographies that you can live in. So there are neighborhoods, and the actual behavioral pattern you just saw is more of like your address in that neighborhood. So it gives us a very unique picture of how that person shows up. So what I want to show you here is how do you actually use this? We're talking a lot about theory, but in practice, it can be a very different thing. So what I want to show you is, hey, when you have an inside salesperson, we use this all the time in our search process, and we help our clients calibrate their expectations of what they think is the ideal profile for a given role. And what you can see is based on an inside salesperson, we wanted to have someone with a high goal orientation, a risk tolerant, self-driven. And this is the behavioral pattern that typically shows up nicely for a salesperson. So before we even started the search, we knew we needed someone who's unafraid of rejection, connects well with people, is really open to having multiple kind of balls in the air, and is formal enough to be able to follow through on what they promise. And what we had was Heather. So Heather is a fantastic candidate. She's an example of someone who loves perfection, is a bit more task oriented. And if you look at her profile, you can see where she sits, right? She tends to be very successful, highly intelligent, bilingual in nature. She's a bit more introspective. She seeks results and oftentimes likes perfection. And so what I want to do is actually double click a little bit on where we see the delta on that. So when you see Heather, you see where she sits. And if you look, you can see that there's kind of two main areas where we flagged around her candidacy. So one is that her extroversion, she naturally is a bit more introverted. And so that question in the interview process was, hey, how does it feel to flex over more towards a high B? Is that a function that you're happy to do well? And is that something that you're strong in? Or is that going to create some strain for you or dissonance if you have to maintain a pace? And what we decided to do was design the role where it was more internal sales and less front facing for her. The other thing we did is the factor in the delta around patience. And so what you see is somebody who, she's situationally patient. And so the question was, how do we actually help her better align for this job to make sure that she's comfortable with the variety of the job, and where can we add more stability where she needs it for her to be successful? So that's an example of how you can use this data and insights to kind of help you grow as a team. So that's kind of the big picture on hire. And I'm happy to take any questions. If anyone has any questions, you can type them in chat and we can talk a little bit more about that. Otherwise, I'm going to move in and help you see how we think about designing teams to make this even more amplified and impactful. All right. Feel free to type any questions in, raise your hand. Happy to address along the way. So while we're waiting, if you have any questions, I'm going to start talking a little bit about hiring smartly for your team. And one of the questions that I had here that you're welcome to chime in on is, how do you know you have a winning team, right? How do you know that your team is operating at its highest and best level? That's $1 billion question, if you ask me. And, at the end of the day, we measure it in a whole bunch of different ways. We can measure it in the company's growth. We can measure, it in your revenue numbers, in your client satisfaction, and your retention numbers, and your engagement. But sometimes you just kind of know, your gut kind of tells you, like, this is a team that feels like magic. We are just operating, we're collectively working, and we've got real respect and understanding of how we show up for each other and support each other. So when you have that, performance soars, and when it feels right, and oftentimes when it doesn't. So we've all been in teams where something is off balance or people aren't gelling. You're spending a lot of time managing interpersonal conflict, or you're kind of managing a lot of dynamics that don't seem either healthy or supportive to the overall team goals. And so what we do is we use predictive index to help us actually align the team more appropriately. And I know that I want to be mindful of time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually jump to an example. I'm going to slide forward, and I'm happy to talk through a couple other examples and another point. But the headline here is that when it comes to hiring, there's no magic bullet when you think about bringing a person into a team or designing the team. You're really using behavioral assessments and profiles to celebrate the strengths of each of your team members and to make sure that you understand kind of the value of self-awareness at the individual level and how you can use that awareness to develop better relationships with your colleagues. And so what I want to show you is an example. We had worked with a senior leadership team, and for a company that's about 500 million in revenue, they've got about 400 employees, very high growth organization and a large leadership team. So this is kind of the composite of the group. And they were in the process of hiring a COO. So what we did is we used actually the predictive index design features to be able to design appropriately, not only for how to think about this team and how it operates, but also how to hire the right talent into that team. And so when you look at these 4 quadrants, I just want to take a step back and help you understand that, what we're looking at is understanding team behaviors in kind of 4 major lenses. You can be a cultivating team with certain profiles, a stabilizing team, an exploring team, or producing. And depending on where you sit and the team members that are sitting in this space, you will have folks who either move more towards center and are more of the flexors, if you will, on the profiles, and those who sit more on the outskirts of that circle. So when we look at our team type for this particular team, when we were consulting into this client, what we knew is that, hey, this is a super risk tolerant team. A lot of their team sits in this upper right quadrant. And, they are big picture, they're daring, got a lot of innovation and growth. They're willing to listen to each other. They have some really key strengths. What we also know is that in normal team dynamics, when things are going well, these things can be incredibly valuable. They solve problems effectively. They're really good risk takers. They make decisions decisively. But what we also know is that if this team's in crisis, let's say they haven't had that COO for, a year and a half in this case, they might be exhausting each other with new ideas, but not really focused on the productivity component of the job. So they're losing themselves in the next big idea, or they might be adding more complexity to the work that they're doing because they're more impulsive in their decision making, and they're not taking the step back to kind of work through the more boring, according to them, process and procedures to be able to execute effectively. And so what we do is we help advise them, especially in the process of a hire, to figure out, hey, how do I avoid making these types of decisions in the heat of the moment? How do we build a pause so that we're actually thinking through the outcomes, and that we don't also let certain voices over dominate or dominate in the room. It's a big room to have and navigate. What we also do is we amplify this and we give them even a bigger picture of what their strategy looks like. So this is based off of the Harvard Business School, Linda Applegate, a professor at HBS, who really developed an incredible competing values framework. And this framework gives us a deeper understanding of what are the key strategies. If it comes down to prioritization for our client, how do you prioritize the things that you are going to market with? And each quadrant represents, a particular framework and understanding. So we're not going to go into a ton of detail, but what I want to give you a headline on in these quadrants is that when we actually took the strategy of that senior leadership team that I was just sharing with you, and we overlay the strategic initiatives, you can see, one, they're driving an anchoring strategy. So their strategy is really rooted in the employee experience and in process and precision. And what we knew was that, oh my goodness, there's a lot of folks in the team that can flex in one area or the other. But knowing that a great majority are living in this innovation and agility space means that we have some gaps in caring for this role and function. And so when it came to hiring that new COO, what we knew is that, hey, we wanted to target a very specific profile, looking for an operator, someone who's going to be more pragmatic, stable, and thorough, and have really heavy understanding of how to drive more stabilizing strategies when it came to that hire. Now, the power of that is that by building that awareness within this team on just how they're currently designed, how they can think about those blind spots in areas where they may not be paying a lot of attention, and then also coupling that with their strategy, we're able to give them a really solid understanding of how actually to hire smartly for their team. So I want to go ahead and, thank you for this time. At the end of the day, what we're here to do is really help cultivate self-awareness at every level of the organization. And we want to see teams be more thoughtful and introspective about how they develop their teams, not only at the point of hire, but also as they bring those folks in to optimize success in the organization. So that is the presentation, and I'm happy to address any questions that you might have.
I'm just going to pop on to say thank you so much, Kristen. And if anybody does have questions, please feel free to send them along via chat, or Kristen's contact information is on the screen. I will be sending a recording of this presentation to all of our attendees, so you'll have a chance to go back and look at some of the information in more detail, listen to Kristen's insights again, and yes, please definitely get in touch with her to explore different points of a session. Does anybody if nobody has any questions right now, I see some folks are jumping off. So I do want to say thank you so much, Kristen, for such an engaging presentation. And again, we'll be sending this information out. So everybody have a wonderful day. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.